Hello, my name is Pete Rohrbach, and this is our third installment in Conversations on the Serial podcast, a project that Rabia Chaudhry and I started a couple of weeks ago related to episodes of the Serial podcast that are coming out. More specifically, what I'm trying to do in these conversations is to explore the meta-narrative, which is what the term I'm using for the kind of stories or communities that are created because of Serial and how those things potentially impact each other. But I'm also interested in looking at the effects of new media environments on an unfolding narrative like Serial. So that's me. I'm Pete, and I'll let Rabia introduce herself.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me again. My name is Rabia Chaudhry, and I am a family friend of Adnan's. He is my younger brother's good friend, and I have been kind of custodian of many of the records for 15 years since he's been incarcerated. And I blog about the series as it's going along, Serial, the show, and I'm the one who contacted Sarah and everything. So.
Mm-hmm. Saad, would you like to introduce yourself as well? Saad is joining us for the first time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. My name's Saad Chaudhry. I'm Adnan's best friend. We've known him since freshman year of high school, and this incident all down our senior year of high school. So it's been over 15 years now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get started with. I'd like to begin with something that we have talked about briefly, but that Saad, I think that your experience is going to be unique for us. You said in our preliminary conversations that you hadn't really had any experience on Reddit before the Serial podcast began, and that as that subreddit kind of exploded with people talking about theories of the case, and you guys waded into it, that was kind of a new experience for you. And I'm interested to kind of like hear you tell that story, like from the beginning of when you landed on Reddit related to Serial, and what that experience has been like, and what you kind of think of that platform and the community that's gathered there.
Well, my sister Rabia first sent an email to Sarah and I saying, hey, there's a new thread on Reddit where people are, commenting and blogging and, writing their questions regarding this case and Serial. So, I looked into it. I thought it could be very helpful in the fact that, it can kind of connect myself, Rabia, Sarah, with maybe some other players in this whole story. Mm-hmm. Can also connect us with people that may have went to Woodlawn High School that have a different perspective or have different friends and different ideas of what they remembered. When I first started engaging in it, I was a little bit more active, and then as time went on, I saw that I really can't, keep up with the amount of activity on Reddit. So I kind of stepped away from it. The only thing that I'm really engaging with people is the thread that I created, where you could really ask me anything about what I remember about the trial during that time period, and even questions now relating to Adnan and myself.
Mm-hmm. What is your feeling on the kind of discourse that happens on Reddit as opposed to other places where you see people talking about the either the case or the podcast? Do you feel like Reddit is pretty representative of how people feel about Serial in general, or do you sense kind of like a different, like is Reddit in some sense threshed and different?
Well, it seems like on Facebook and on Twitter, a lot of people, I'd say majority of the people, are very supportive, wishing the best and hoping for the best outcome for Adnan, myself, and everyone else involved. Reddit was something that was different in the fact that everyone that I ran into, knew Adnan like I did, and that, was around during that time period, all believed in his innocence. With Reddit, you do have some people, you have a good amount of people that actually don't necessarily believe in his innocence. They more believe in his guilt with all the suspicious things that were happening around the case. Mm-hmm. So it was just different for me. It was a different experience actually engaging with people that don't believe in his innocence. I think Rabia was the same way. And, we finally realized that it's not really our job into changing everyone's opinion about how they feel about Adnan or the case, or even, answering or figuring out this, tragedy or figuring out this story. That's not really our job. We're here to really offer what we can, and I was 17, 18 at the time, so I can only offer so much.
Right. Yeah, that's something that Rabia and I have talked about several times, both in these live conversations and on our own, about the clear difference between what Sarah wants to do and what you and Rabia want to do. And I think, just to tie that to the episode that we've just heard at the end of last week, Sarah states very clearly, it is not my goal to solve the problem of Adnan's innocence, which was interestingly a point that got picked up by the Slate broadcast, and they cast a whole bunch of, kind of like dispersions or suspicions on that claim. And they're often talking about kind of how they feel like Sarah is, building or constructing the narrative. So they're paying attention in some sense to some things that I am too. But I do believe very strongly that Sarah is much more, and the team is much more interested in telling a story than having a specific outcome from that story. And they have to be really aware of the fact that their work can affect that story, or is affecting that story, while at the same time they're trying to objectively report on it. And that's, that's always been a problem for journalists, but especially now, and especially in the format that they've chosen to use for the show, it's increasingly a problem, the problem of subjectivity and objectivity. So, I think it's important. It's been refreshing for me the whole time that I've been talking to Rabia for us to be able to be really clear about the fact that she wants one thing, Sarah wants another thing, and when somebody comes to the podcast, there's no obvious agenda that person has. They're going to pick their own from having, from whatever they're bringing into listening to the show. Rabia, what about this question? The episode last week brought up Deirdre Enright and the Innocence Project and their decision to take on Adnan's case, which obviously couldn't have happened over the last week. Obviously this is something that Sarah has kind of known for an amount of time and kind of built it in consciously right now. Can you, can you just kind of respond to your, you talked about this on your blog a little bit, but respond to what it was like to kind of finally hear her roll that detail out that you already knew. And also, can you walk us through a little bit of what the potential trajectory of that is? Like, what potential legal things will happen because the Innocence Project has picked up Adnan Syed's case?
Yeah. So, I'll start off by saying that we all have known that they decided to take the case, or offered to really take the case, from before the podcast began. It's been a bit. So that hasn't necessarily concluded to anything yet, because when the Innocence Project takes cases, or anybody else, this kind of work can take years and years, sometimes months if it's something changes quickly, but generally it takes a while. But I had expected that this would be a detail maybe revealed towards the end of this show, because it could explain kind of the ambiguity involved in a lot of people have questions like, why isn't Sarah, will there be an outcome? Well, there might be a very clear answer by the end if the Innocence Project got their work. But it's nearly impossible, I think, by the end of the show that they will have been able to produce some very specific results. Well, with the exception of one thing, if one possibility, and I'll talk about that. So I don't work in criminal defense. This is not my field, and also in every state the practice varies, I believe. But I can kind of give a general overview of how these matters suss out. So we heard from the podcast that from the documents they identified DNA evidence that could potentially have some kind of DNA weight that was never tested, against DNA. or was tested for other things but just not DNA. So there's or that was submitted for testing and there are no results in the files. So they've already identified certain gaps. Like now the job would be to make sure the evidence exists, right? They have to go in, just because it's on paper, we don't know if it's been destroyed, right? So they would have to, and it could be, since the time they took it to now that they've actually determined whether or not it's been destroyed. I actually don't know. I don't know where they all are exactly in the process.
Let's say though, Rabia, just to jump ahead, let's say that they do a bunch of this research and they find something that they feel like should change the outcome for Adnan. How would that work? What would happen?
Yeah, I mean, so that's, yeah, I mean, like, if they were to do the research and found out that all of that evidence is gone, I don't know if they could do anything beyond that. I just don't know, right? But if they were to find evidence that they could actually test, they would then have to compel the state to give them that evidence, right? They have to file some motions, make sure that the state turns it over. In some cases, that's taken years and years because there's a lot of resistance. Then once they get the evidence, they have to get it tested, and then we'll have a result. And if there's a result that shows a possibility of somebody else who, let's say, has a criminal history already, or adds something to the case that has been missing before, that would give them. I think. I mean, I think the way it would work is that they would file a motion to reopen the case based on that kind of evidence, and then the state would have to respond and decide either if there's compelling evidence that it was not Adnan, right? The state can either reopen the case, dismiss charges, right, and let him go, or they could cut a plea with him. They could even say, okay, fine, you know what, we don't want to deal with this again. We're going to cut a plea, give you time served, and just let you go, okay? Or they could give him a new trial if they still think he's guilty. I mean, like, there's different ways it could go. Or they might just deny that, the court could deny a motion. So yeah, these things take a lot of time, and I think there's a lot of possible outcomes. I might not be completely 100% right on that process because again, it's not my field, but generally I believe that's how it would. Those are potential outcomes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, I mean, we talked briefly before the conversation started about this kind of hypothetical situation that I was imagining this week, where potentially the serial team gets the Innocence Project on the case, and then in the process of building the story, the Innocence Project comes back and says, "Oh, we're ready to do something amazing," and go to the court and everything. And I was imagining this hypothetical situation where Sarah and her team would want that to not happen yet because it would disrupt the narrative of the podcast. But your response and my own kind of like sense of trust of what they're doing is that, A, I mean, it would take way too long for anything like that to happen while the podcast is going on, and B, that wouldn't mess things up, or that there'd be no reason for her to stand in the way of that going on, nor could she.
No, I have absolutely 100%. I mean, that's just not how they operate. That's not how. I haven't seen Sarah. I mean, like, I think that it's like we have a different, like, when you're talking about kind of what is Sarah's role in this, what do I envision my role? I mean, I feel like now there's a third major player who's going to help shape the narrative here, and that is Innocence Project. But their work is going to be completely independent of me, of Sarah, of the podcast, and that's how it should be. I mean, there are no attorneys. No attorneys can ethically be beholden to a journalist or to anyhow. And right. I don't think someone would ever say, she would never do that. She's got way too much integrity for that. Yeah. And also, I don't think it would disrupt it anyways, honestly. I mean, if for some reason, Innocence Project was able to find evidence, file the motion, and get some kind of a result within the next 4 weeks, which is nearly impossible. Awesome. But even then, there would be plenty for Sarah to report about. I mean, there'd be still plenty. There's so much. That's a whole other story then.
Right.
What is that evidence? What did it mean? I don't think so. But I think that explains why Sarah has said there are many different arcs they're exploring. They don't know exactly which way it's going to go.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I want to be clear from bringing that up. I don't want anyone to misunderstand that that's actually something that I think would happen. It's just the kind of that my brain is really obsessed with, how all the narrative strands impact each other, how the story of Serial impacts Adnan, how your own experience going over the case is going to be different from the lawyers who are going over it at the Innocence Project. How people's lives are affected greatly or minorly by their regular kind of interaction with the show. All of that stuff, which relates to a question that I'd like to come back to you for, Saad. And Can you talk about, Robbie and I have talked about this before, but from your perspective, can you talk about how much Adnan knows about the podcast and understands kind of its virality, or whether all of that is kind of something that he's not that interested in? How much interaction have you had with him since the show began?
Okay, I went to visit him a few weeks ago. Since then, I've heard a lot from him over the phone. He probably calls about, I'd say, at least once a week. A lot of the times he calls collect, and I could be busy with the client, I could be at a work function. So there's many times he calls that we just don't get to connect. Yesterday, he did catch me, so we were able to talk yesterday, and I told him, how much this is actually progressing, how big of a story it is. He really doesn't have any idea how big it really is. One thing that was interesting was, he said that he wants to, read more podcasts. He's only got the transcripts for the first 2, so there's 5 more now, so he needs to catch up. But along with that, yesterday...
Can I interject something really quickly?
Yeah.
I got a message from a Redditor who has now printed out and mailed Adnan all the transcripts. I don't even know this person, but anyhow.
Awesome. Well, and Adnan said that he's been getting, a lot of mail, and he said that he's been trying to reply to everyone, and he said there's a lot of, people that have wrote him that have given him their personal stories of how they relate to this story, and, given him some personal information where he feels, pretty, taken aback that someone would open up themselves their story and take the time to write him. So he's been, excited. It's been, anyone that's been incarcerated for that long to get, a flood of letters and, a lot of support, they're going to enjoy it. So he does enjoy it. He enjoys, writing back. He said that this last weekend, an inmate called him over to his cell and was like, check this out, and showed him a small article from Rolling Stones. So he said that was just something that he couldn't believe, where he just was like, I can't believe my name is in the Rolling Stones, and I can't believe that this story is getting this big.
Yeah.
So, and as far as, in prison when he is locked up, something that's pretty common is the fact that every inmate thinks they're innocent, or every inmate has a story or says that they're innocent. So he doesn't really share, what's going on with his story as far as him working with Sarah, him working with the Innocence Project. So he had to explain a lot of what was going on to other inmates once they saw the article of Rolling Stones. So yeah, he's a little bit, basically, he's a little bit behind the times because he can't keep up with us on the podcast on a weekly basis. So everything that's happening to him is like, seems like it's lagging a couple of weeks behind. But he's definitely excited. He appreciates everything, even the attention. He understands that Sarah's goals is to relay a good story, a good narrative, but that's really where he keeps it. He doesn't have all his hopes in Sarah, specifically.
And obviously he's aware of the Innocence Project move, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So he's aware of the Innocence Project. He's excited about that as well. He has been in communication with them. So yeah, he's excited about what's happening. He said, to me literally that, this has been 15 years in the making, that he's been praying for something like this to happen, just for someone to show him some attention. And I think a lot of that could also be related to Robbie and I's first interview with Sarah. I was so excited. I didn't know what a podcast format was even about. I was just excited that someone was talking to my sister and I about this case. Literally, her, myself, Sarah, we were all in a room, and we, Robbie and I were just thrilled as could be that someone's been giving us some time, some attention, and that is seeing that everything's not adding up with this case, with the trial, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do either of you know whether this is just a side question I didn't anticipate? Do either of you know if Sarah has concluded her conversations with Adnan, or do you get the sense that those are just ongoing and might be ongoing until the show is complete?
Oh, they're definitely ongoing.
Okay.
They're definitely ongoing, and I know because some of what happened, our community is also, we get information from the grapevine in the community, so and sometimes there's times when she hasn't been able to get in touch with him, so she'll be like, I need to can ask me or one of us to help her, to relay a message if we hear from him. But she's having conversations with other people, and then obviously she wants to go back and talk to Adnan and get his reaction about certain things she's heard or been told or found. So it is definitely ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'd like to take a shift, and this relates a little bit to something that Saad was talking about a moment ago, or that I was asking about. But can you guys talk about how your digital interactions, your life online that exists, that that all of us, to a greater or lesser degree have, how your life online, how your digital presence, or the frequency or infrequency with which you get on the web has been affected by the publication of this story?
Robbie, I can let you go first on that one.
Oh yeah, I have always spent like a significant amount of time on social media. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So yeah, I've always spent plenty of time on social media before, but now, especially Reddit. Like I had to get rid of the app from my phone because I wouldn't sleep.
Yeah.
But even now, as soon as I wake up, I look to see, are there any new threads and what else are people talking about? I don't know why I can't pull my way. Well, the reason I really can't pull myself away from that community is because sometimes there are some really kind of amazing things people dig up, right? Like things that never occurred to you and questions that I really want to consider.
Can you give an example of something like that?
I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the research they did on the payphone, right? Like somebody did research about whether there was, in response to the story where Sarah said she couldn't find any evidence of a payphone, somebody found records that there was a payphone there when there was a Ramada hotel there, which had been taken down in 1997, I believe, or 95, and the assumption is that, and there's no record to show that the payphone would have remained. It would have been really weird to demo everything and leave a payphone standing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the point is that there was a payphone there, and that, I thought that was really weird and odd and interesting information.
Mm-hmm.
Other stuff, just like theories and questions, like things that make me think about how somebody who might be thinking, why people might consider Adnan guilty if they look at this. Because I went through, at the end of that trial, I never would have found somebody in that position guilty, right? And I've always wondered, like, how and why did the jury come to this conclusion? All of them, right? Within less than 2 hours. How did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
So then hearing people's questions, like, really informs, like, even the gaps that were in his defense, right? Like, these are things Christina didn't address, not clearly or not at all. So even in terms of, like, let's say crafting, if there's a trial in the future, crafting a future defense, I think Reddit would be a gold mine to go back and look at the kinds of things that are really standing out for people. Mm-hmm. And how would you then address those and make sure you address those in a courtroom? But yeah, so I'm online a lot, and I'm getting some really interesting, like I've gotten a number of interactions where people are like, oh, I'm a fangirl, or I'm like, I'll favorite something or I'll retweet something somebody said, and they're like, oh my God, Robbie, I'd retweet it, and I'm like, yeah. Okay, I'm like in my pajamas. I
saw somebody's tweet this weekend that said, I just want Rabia to be my best friend, or I want to hang out with Rabia.
Something like that, yeah.
That's just such an unusual kind of moment.
It's kind of interesting. But and among people who know me for years, they're saying to me, that, one of my friends, she's a doctor, she went to an allergy conference this weekend, and she said everywhere she went, like, people were talking about cereal at an allergy conference, and then we're so excited when she would say, yeah, I know Robbie, and they're like, oh my God, So how many degrees of separation between other people and us? And I've been asked to do like a in-person hangout, almost like I don't know, like a tea party or something, to sit around with a bunch of locals and talk about cereal. And I work with the national NCTC, which is the National Counterterror Center, on other issues. And they're like, hey, would you come into the office and talk about cereal with us? So for me, that's on one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it can be emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah, right. Saad, what do you think? Back to your digital life question.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you have interaction with people on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, and in the beginning, it definitely would, consume myself. It consumed Rabia. We would see something on Reddit. She would call me or text me, and I would call her right away, and we would talk about it and discuss it. However, we definitely laid off the pedal, and we have to get back to our normal lives. Rabia's she's a mother. I'm, busy with my business, and it definitely affected, my day-to-day, and the fact that I've never checked a Reddit website so much before, and along with that, the only thing I feel like I should do is be at least accessible, where someone messages me or someone contacts me on Reddit. The least I could do is reply to them. One thing that I do want to say is the fact that I think Rabia, myself, Adnan, we appreciate people just interacting and discussing this case. It's not necessarily if they're find him guilty, which is fine, because we do get to see that point of view, and we also get to interact with them and hopefully hold good conversations. There's some people that see, the thing with Reddit, we don't know who we're talking to. We don't know if we're talking to someone that is a defense attorney, or we're talking to someone, no offense, that's living in their parents' basement and is writing out of still in their pajamas 4 o'clock in the evening. So we just don't know. So we try to interact with whoever we can, but once we see it start getting a little bit negative, or like we see people start pointing fingers, that's where Robbie and I will try to at least step out. Our job was to get the attention on the story, but we're not professionals, we're not journalists, we're not criminal attorneys here. So it's we do as much as we can, but we feel like the story, the case is in good hands, and that's the only thing we can do. We have to have blind faith that some good will come from this.
Yeah, I'll say from my own perspective that I've had to do some crafting as well. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of enmeshed in a whole bunch of new media projects or checking new media sites, because that's my work. Like, that's the work that I'm having my students do is oftentimes in those kinds of places. But for instance, this weekend, someone popped up and put a whole bunch of kind of like short critiques of either our conversation or of Rabia or some things that Rabia said on one of the YouTube videos that we had up. But they were questions that were specifically about the case, and I had to remove them and say, and put like a runner up at the top that said, like, I'm not going to take off things that disagree with people, but I am going to take off things that don't have anything to do with what we're talking about. Like, that's what Reddit is for. Like, go ye to Reddit and enjoy that. And I mean, I was conscious when I did that this is an example of me kind of like crafting the narrative of what these conversations are, and putting up boundaries and saying, like, that conversation belongs somewhere else. And all of that. I mean, all of that kind of negotiation stuff is interesting to me. So as we're right at 30 minutes. Maybe I could ask you guys for a couple more minutes or up to 5 minutes. I have kind of like one more question that I'd like to get both of your feedback on. Do you have time for that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the end of this is a hyper kind of crafted choice, I think, by the people who are by Sarah and her team. So at the end of the last episode, when she gestures towards Jay, anyone who's listened to every episode of this podcast, I think at this point, knows that there's not enough information about Jay. There's not enough information about Jay. This is the person that I want to know the most about. And I mean, from my perspective as a listener, I've just known the whole time there's, like, we're not getting enough information about that person because it's coming later, like it's delayed on purpose, consciously. And I'm wondering, from your perspective of what you know about the case, like having much more in your head about the case than any of us who were listening, have you also felt this feeling of absence as the story has unfolded of this character, and what kind of like anxieties or hopes or interests do you have for the episode that's coming?
That's a big question. Sai, do you want to go first? I got to think about it for a minute.
I can. As far as with the whole Jay scenario, people have asked me, like, why aren't you just outright, upset with Jay, and why aren't you publicly saying, like, let's point all fingers at him, the cause of all this? Well, there's a lot of other factors. There's also, if this is a case about police, unethical practices, them, coaching a witness, them basically sticking a, square peg in a circle just to make it fit. Jay could be a victim in all of this. I mean, he was 17, 18 at that time as well, and he could have been forced, like, look, you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, or you're going to go along with this story. And I mean, you would hope that police practices wouldn't be like that, but a lot of people on Reddit have been pulling up, statistics on the, on Baltimore police, and how many convictions they were getting and what their turnover rate was, and a lot of it is suspicious. So I mean, for Adnan and myself and Rabia to just point at Jay would, I think, be eliminating a lot of other factors. So he's an aspect of this. Rabia and I would like to hear about what he has to say about this. If not, we'd at least like to hear about the deal that he got, and that should be public information because that's what the state provided to him. So I think that's when it says the next episode's title is The Deal with Jay, I'm more thinking it's more about the deal he got, not about what Jay has to say about all of this.
Yeah, because almost certainly we can't get that. I mean, almost certainly we're not going to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, almost certainly, you're right. That's for obvious reasons. But Robbie, I'll let you go ahead and put in your 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like this next episode is kind of a big black hole for me, other than knowing that she probably will discuss the actual plea deal. I have no idea what else she's gonna, and I'm pretty sure that can't be it, because people's questions are not just about the plea deal, right? People have a lot of the questions. I do know, but I don't know who, but I do know that Sarah has apparently interviewed people. I don't know if she's interviewed Jay. I really don't know. I know she wanted to and was trying to, but I just don't know if she did. But I do know that she did interview people who know Jay, or his family members, or people who grew up with. I mean, so I'm hoping that some of their voices are going to come in. And what's interesting is, like, I have always held a deep resentment, because I've never really thought about it in terms of, okay, he was a kid, maybe he was pressured, maybe, to me it was like, this is the person who, without Jay's evidence or testimony, the cell phone, there's nothing else. There's no case without his testimony, right? So, for better or worse, he offered testimony that I believe is false testimony, that changed many times, that there were a lot of lies that even the police pointed out, and he knows why he did it. Nobody knows why. I say that also at the same time, if I'm going to assert that Adnan's innocent, that means I believe that somebody else killed Hay. And I don't know who that is. This is not Maryland's not a huge state. I work in the area. My family lives in the area. I have, there's safety concerns that, I've had nightmares, in fact, about, something terrible happening. I even posted on Facebook that, if I get to this, I just want you to know that I'm already, like, scared of something like that. I mean, like, although, maybe I'm kind of overstating it, but you just don't know. I mean, I can't be like, well, Adnan didn't do it, but oh well, somebody murdered her. Somebody murdered her in cold blood. And she was a kid. She was a child. She was my child's age. So there's a dangerous person out there somewhere, and they could be very close in this community. I don't know. And so I think, I don't know. I feel the whole key to this is Jay. He is the only one I can say for sure. If you think Adnan's guilty, you might think Adnan knows what happened. But if you think Adnan's innocent, then you know that only really Jay is the only one who definitely knows what happened. So I don't know. I mean, I've said prayers for many, many years that God opens his heart and he decides to come forward and say, I need to come clean again. We heard him in the interview. Okay, I come whatever it was in his notes that I come clean. That he comes clean again. So I don't know. But no matter what happens, I think people are still not going to be satisfied with whatever Sarah presents, because we're always going to have so many questions. And look, if I was Jay's lawyer, I would be like, don't talk to anybody. Honestly.
Joke. I mean, if I was Jay's mailman, I would be saying that.
Don't talk to him. Yeah.
I mean, at this point, the ways in which I interact with this story are so numerous that I feel like I almost could set up a weekly calendar, like that starts with Thursday and then moves to your blog on Friday and then the Slate podcast on Saturday. And
I might skip that. I might skip that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, I was frustrated by listening to that as well. But different from you, who I think, you and I even have different focuses on paying attention to this, and I think, like, when I look at some of the articles that have come out, we've talked about this before. When I look at some of the articles that have come out about the show, and the NBC reporter Maria Elena that contacted us about putting our first video into her NBC story, very graciously. I get the sense that, from Rolling Stone to Slate to The Guardian to whomever, that this is really a moment where major media outlets are forced to deal with the evolution of something that they cannot predict or control, and that's something that that people do not like. I mean, editors do not like things that they have to immediately respond to and that they don't completely understand. And I sense a kind of reactivity in some of the journalism that's come out about the show, which I find interesting and indicative of the fact that that Sarah is doing something that makes that really is fresh and that makes some people uncomfortable because it's not something that they can exert control over. Maybe MailChimp can exert control over it, but that's probably.
A lot of outlets are just kind of playing catch up with this phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Not many of them covered it as when this podcast first started. It wasn't like there was all this anticipation and excitement even before, not in the media. I mean, apparently they were already, best-selling on iTunes and stuff beforehand, but in the major media outlets, nobody was really paying attention to who's the most exciting podcast nowadays. Right. So I think a lot of them are kind of playing catch-up, and I don't know. I think this is like a whole new frontier on how stories will be told in the future, and I'm sure even the Serial team is going to learn lessons. I mean, like, this is, people have all these questions and critiques of Serial, and I feel like saying, this is the first instance for them too.
Yeah.
And we are all kind of trying to figure this out as it goes along, and I think everybody is trying to be as ethical as possible, and we have to allow people to kind of, we can't control it, and I think it's the weird critique that people are saying, how come Sarah can't do this, and how come Sarah, I'm like, we have to understand that the story is it's almost happening in real time. Yeah. Tomorrow somebody could come forward that totally throws everything we know out of the water. We just don't know where it's going to go.
That's right. And the moment that I've been anticipating, which may never come. I mean, everybody else has what they're hoping happens. I hope Adnan gets let out of jail. I hope Adnan gets put away for life. Whatever people are saying that they hope are the outcome. Like the thing that I'm really fascinated to see is going to happen is whether one of these episodes is going to react or respond to things that are happening because the podcast exists. So her ability to like drag somebody in or interact with somebody who didn't exist in the story beforehand but now does.
Yeah.
Because of their, like the person who sent, just a small example, the person who sent Adnan the transcripts from the show. If I were making the story, I would be really like interested in talking to that person. Where did that come from? Why did you do that? And have you ever done something like that before? And like that's just fascinating.
Right.
That's just something.
Yeah, no, I think the answer there is yes. I think that people are coming forward as the podcast has started that she never even knew existed or maybe would not have spoken to her.
Mm-hmm.
I think even this last episode to me was, I could be wrong, but it's a guess, that it was that the reason they decided to go and let the public know that the Innocence Project is involved now is because of the kind of questions people have, why don't you have some more certainty? Why don't we know where this is going? Mm-hmm. To kind of show that, listen, this is happening also on the side. Mm-hmm. And that's going to, but Sarah's story as a journalist is very different than what's happening with the Innocence Project, right?
Right.
So, but she has to, she put it out there so people can understand that there's a certain amount of uncertainty because we don't know how that's going to unfold. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's why I think they're writing episodes like up until the night before or the a couple days before.
Right. We're right at 1:40, so I've overstayed you guys' time a whole bunch. Saad, I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us and for giving us a kind of authentic picture of what this experience has been like for you. Your experience is, I think, really, really valuable to understanding this picture. So thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And Rabia, you and I, we haven't talked about this a whole bunch. I think we've traded like an email or two about it, but I think that we're going to be joined next week by Adam, who is one of the moderators on the subreddit community, or the subreddit on Serial. And I mean,
by the way, did you know that there's another subreddit called Meta Serial?
I have heard of that, and that is brought up in the video. I'm sure that you've seen the video, the comedy video about the people discussing Serial, right? You've seen.
Yeah, I did. Oh, I actually didn't catch that though. I didn't catch that sub. I just discovered it 2 days ago.
Yeah, well, I think I would imagine that when that thing popped up, like if I were one of those guys, that would have been the seed for me to like make that thing. Like once you have a subreddit that's on a subreddit, that's just too ripe for comedy. But I haven't looked at that actually.
There's some good parodies out there. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean it's and Robbie and I have talked about this the whole time. Is that like there is and this is conversations I've gotten into with people online about it too. There is an entertainment value to the story. There's a popular cultural kind of like it's just it's pulling a lot of water right now. Like a lot of people are listening to it and know about it, and the ability to kind of like make comedy about it is it's relevant because that's how much people are talking about. But at the same time, like I keep coming back to, these are stories, these are people's lives. Like there's the story of what happened to Adnan, and there's Adnan sitting in jail. There's the story of what happened to Hay, and there's Hay's death. These are different things. And like for me as a scholar, an audience member, whatever, I want to understand one thing separate from the other. So thanks a lot again for being here, Rabia and Saad. And Rabia, we'll talk later on this week. Probably our communication will peak again at like Thursday, 7:30 a.m. or something like that.
All right. Thanks so much, Pete.
You're welcome, and we hope that everybody joins us next Monday and every Monday until Serial is finished. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.